I enjoy theatre acting because of the joy it gives me as an actor. I enjoy television for the fame it gives me as an actor. And I enjoy films for the recognition they give me. It goes worldwide. You're part of franchises like the Bond film and Octopussy or Bold and Beautiful. These are things that go to hundreds of countries with over 1 billion viewers. But film certainly has a magic of its own, which is not like television. But each has their own strengths, their own powers. As I said, one gives you creative satisfaction, one gives you vast reach, and the other gives you a kind of glory, because film is still regarded as a very special place to be.
All right, so hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Book Cafe podcast. I'm your host Omar Nizam, and in today's episode, we will be talking about this book right here behind me entitled Stories I Must Tell: The Emotional Life of an Actor. And the author who has written the book is somebody who needs absolutely no introduction, because not only is he a Bollywood superstar, he's also an international megastar whose distinguished career spans film, television, and stage alike for the past 3 decades. I'm delighted to welcome to the show for this episode the author himself, Mr. Kabir Bedi. So, hi Kabirji, welcome to Book Cafe Podcast.
Thank you so much, Omar. Thank you for your kind introduction to me. Most generous. And thank you for the lovely things you said. I'm delighted to be on the book show with you, and look forward to having a great chat and sharing it with all the people that are tuning in and tune in.
Yes, absolutely. And so, Kabirji, I would just like to, before we get into talking about the book, obviously, you know that our show is based out of Dhaka, Bangladesh. And
Yes,
you did in fact visit Dhaka a couple of months back. So
I
I would
did.
just like, absolutely. And so I'd just like to, take this opportunity to ask you a little bit about your visit to Dhaka. This was your first visit to Dhaka, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Yes.
Yes, it was my first visit to Dhaka, and I came there to do a show I do called Ode to Rumi,
Hmm.
which is a rendition of the poems of Rumi, the great Sufi mystic, the original mystic, um, and give my own interpretation of what he said, the mystic experience, the commonality between all the mystics of all the religions, whether it's the Christian mystics like Thomas Avila and St. Francis of Assisi, and
SCC.
a number of mystics there, the Hindu mystics, and of course the Muslim mystics. So, and in every religion, and the commonality of vision that exists between all mystics that have these incredible experiences where they sense the total union with the divine. And so, Ode to Rumi is a show that I travel with. And I came to Dhaka. I performed in Kolkata also at the Tollygunge Club and at the Birla Sabagre. And it gave me great pleasure to come to Dhaka for the first time and perform for my friends in Bangladesh. It was a great joy to come to Dhaka.
Absolutely. And I can say that we loved having you here, and I was very privileged to be sitting right at the front and hearing you, perform all the poems of Rumi. And so, so Kaviji, you mentioned
A quick
Rumi.
correction.
Uh,
A quick correction. I
yeah.
can't perform all the poems of Rumi because he wrote 70,000 verses. I had to select the best of the best.
For sure. And I can say that I believe that 99% of the audience had come to watch you, and 1% had probably gone to watch, because it was about Rumi. But I'd say that we had a fabulous time. And it really was a privilege to actually have you here in Dhaka, because we don't usually get a lot of celebrity visits across the border. But
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
it was really wonderful to interact with you afterwards as well. So just one final point about Bangladesh. Did you have a chance to actually visit, see much of the country during your stay in Dhaka this time around?
No, I didn't. I didn't. I just was able to see some parts of Dhaka. But Bangladesh was certainly very much a part of my consciousness growing up because the Bangladesh War took place in 71 when I was 26 years old, and it was all over the news and how Mujibur Rahman rose up against the Pakistanis, and how even though they won the election, they were not allowed to take power in Pakistan. And so this rebellion started, this revolt started against the West Pakistan government, and how the Indian army came in and mopped up the Pakistanis and gave Sheikh Mujibur Rahman the victory he deserved. So this was very much part of our growing up and our headlines. And so I was very aware of Bangladesh. Also, as a child, I would go very often to Assam because my brother was a tea planter. So I'd always pass over Bangladesh, going to Assam and back, and I'd think about Bangladesh. And I'm amazed by the sheer number of people that make up not just Bangladesh, but even West Bengal. It's when you add the two up, it's almost like the population of America. This is not an insignificant group of people. The Bengalis are a very significant part of the Earth's population. So, and that's shared between Bangladesh and West Bengal. So it's a very important part of the world, and I certainly understand its importance. Also, as a child, I was sent to Shantiniketan for a year to be educated in Shantiniketan, water my Indian roots, understand the Indian educational system, and the medium of instruction there was Bengali, and I had to learn Bengali very fast. Now, it's a bit rusty right now, but give me a week and I'll be speaking. Even now, I can understand what most people say. I just can't construct the sentences. Give me a week and I'll do it. But that grounding in Shantiniketan was certainly gave me a great understanding of Bengali culture, the Bengali ethos, the Bengali language, food, and the grace of the people. So there's many reasons why a visit to Bangladesh feels special, because it's part of the Bengali ethos. Hindu or Muslim, those are divisions that are religious or political or whatever, but the culture and the feeling between the people is essentially the same.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, as they say, better late than never. So, Kabirji, we were absolutely delighted to have you here in Dhaka. And we would, of course, want you to come back on a regular basis for future projects. So,
Sure.
Kabirji, absolutely. So, Kabirji, let's just dive back into the book. You wrote the book as a septuagenarian, and of course, it covers 70 plus years of your life. And I believe that the title is extremely apt because you do have a lot of stories to tell and to share with the world. Let's start with the cover, the book cover itself. Is it true that it was your wife, Parveen Dosanjh, who actually had a big role to play in selecting the cover of the book? Could you help us understand that?
Yeah. She did have a central role in picking this picture because this picture was taken by a very famous photographer of the 70s called Terence O'Neill. And he was the chap who photographed the Rolling Stones, the Pink Floyd, the Beatles, British royalty. So to get an appointment with him to take a picture was a big deal. But following my success in Italy as an actor, I qualified, I guess. So he took a picture of me. And even he said, Kabir, I've taken a lot of pictures. This one I really like. So if Terry O'Neill likes the picture he's taken of me, so I kept this in my records. And when I was thinking of cover for my book, I thought something more contemporary, something more now. And Parveen said, no, this is the best picture ever taken of you. And it's a great photograph and it should be on the cover. And I thought about it and I thought, yes, she's right. She's right. Why not have a picture of me when I was looking my best right after the Europe-wide success of Sandokan, living in London. And that becomes a symbol of those times. So I kept that picture, and thanks to my wife, Parveen Dosanjh.
And I can say that it goes really well with the book, and the picture was it was the best that could have been picked. And of course, my wife Jennifer actually picked out the book, and she had hidden the name. And I was like, wait, who is this really good-looking man on the cover? So when she showed the name, I was like, oh wow, because I was obviously with a lot of your contemporary fans, I think we were all very used to your contemporary photos, and so yes, this did actually come as a huge surprise. So, so Kabirji, the title of the book itself, is it you who actually picked the title, or was it your publisher who picked this particular title?
I picked the title of the book. I wrote my entire book word for word. Okay. I'd actually even compiled the photographs. I'd even done the layout of the typeface and everything, because I was thinking of self-publishing.
Mhm.
And then I found this wonderful publisher in Westland. I went to them and they accepted immediately and they came out of the book immediately. No, the title was mine.
Yeah.
Because, I had so many stories to tell over 3 decades, stretching from Delhi to Bollywood to Europe to London to Hollywood and all the things that happened along the way. I said, how can I tell it all in the pages available to me? So I said, I must tell the essential stories, the ones that are seminal to my life. And so these are the stories I must tell, not the stories I can tell. There's many more I can tell. So Stories I Must Tell became the title of the book. But equally important is the subtitle of the book, which is The Emotional Life of an Actor, because it's seen through the emotional prism of an actor, of a life lived. And many of the experiences that I've had that really mattered to me emotionally, that affected me deeply emotionally, those I've shared in my book, especially in terms of my personal life and the women in my life, etc. And those relationships, those scenes, the nature of the interaction, I've shared those emotions very closely. You could be like a fly on the wall watching certain conversations between me and them and happenings, because I wanted the book to feel vivid, not in general terms, but almost like you're seeing a film, that you see certain things at certain points very, very clearly. So it's a bit of a mixture of real detail in writing and then going into the larger story. And, the aim is to tell the story interesting. So where detail is needed, I go into detail. Where detail is not needed, I skip the details.
Yep.
I always say your job is to buy my book and start reading it. My job is to keep you reading it. So if you start reading it, hopefully I can capture your attention from the beginning, hopefully, and keep you reading. I often say to people, start with chapter 2, because if you don't want to know the backstory of how I went from Delhi to Bombay, the real action begins in chapter 2. So if you're pressed for time, start with chapter 2. If you want real drama, go to chapter 3, etc.
Exactly. But I should take this opportunity to tell all of our viewers and listeners that they shouldn't skip chapter 1, because the hook for the book, the first chapter, where your interactions with the Beatles in the 1960s, is something that really sucks in the reader.
Yeah.
So and of course you've gone on record as saying that you are the biggest Beatles fan that there was in India at the time.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Absolutely. And would you mind just telling us a little bit, Kabirji, about your interaction with the Beatles and how that went about, and what was the story behind that? Yeah.
You see, the thing is, my parents were freedom fighters, and they were very idealistic people, wonderful people, did wonderful things, fought for great causes, the independence of the country, but they had no money. They literally sacrificed a career after being graduates of Oxford just to fight for the freedom struggle. So they had very little money. So when I came, I got the marks to get into St. Stephen's College in Delhi, which was the best college probably in India at the time. But I didn't have the money to pay for it. So I had to freelance. So I freelanced with radio. And while freelancing with radio, and I was the biggest Beatles fan in the world, I heard the Beatles had come into town. I said, wow, how can I meet them? I'll go as an interviewer. So I went to my bosses and they laughed at me when I said, I'll interview the Beatles. The whole daily press calls after them. What are you going to? I said, give me a shot. So anyway, I persuaded them to give me the microphone and the badge and the tape recorder. And I went to the hotel where they were staying, the Oberoi Intercontinental. All the press was swarming around, fans outside being kept behind barricades. And there was this frenzy of everyone looking for the Beatles. I knew I had to find Brian Epstein, the manager, and I knew what he looked like because I was a fan. So finally, I saw him after a 2-hour wait coming out of the elevator, going towards his car in the foyer, outside the foyer. And I went up to him and said, hello, sir, I'm Kabir Bedi, All India Radio. I'm from Government of India, Government All India Radio, as the biggest radio station in the country. And the government have decided the Beatles are going to do an interview at 10 o'clock tonight. What nonsense, the boy's not going to do any interview. I said, sir, the government have decided and announced it. It was a white lie, of course. But he was absolutely apoplectic. And he said, the boys will do no bloody interview. I will do the bloody interview. I said, yes, yes. For me, an interview with Brian Epstein was good enough. So when I went to his room to do the interview a few hours later, he opened the door in a state of great distress. He was sweating. He was obviously not well. He opened the door and I said, Kabir Bedi, sir, All India Radio, interview tonight, sir. And now the thing was, I'd persuaded him because I kept repeating the word government. He'd just gotten in a lot of trouble with the government in the Philippines. So I knew this was their point of vulnerability. So that's what really persuaded him to give me the interview. And when he looked at me, he said, oh, God, I can't do this. I thought, oh, God, I've lost it. He caught my arm, took me across the length of the floor to the suite at the other end where the Beatles were, and knocked on the door. And Paul McCartney opened the door and he says, boys, do me a favor, give this chap an interview. And I was in with the Beatles. So that was one of the oh wow experiences of my life, because I was not just with the greatest musicians on the planet, they were the symbols of the 1960s. They were symbols of the whole flower power revolution, the sexual revolution, the social revolution with people demonstrating for peace, the change of values from a very rigid militaristic view of things that society had to a more relaxed, more human, more cultural, more creative way of looking at life. And we were part of that revolution in India. So to see the Beatles there was just wow. Now, what I said to the Beatles, what they said to me, that's in my book. You've got to read it. It's too long to go into. And the aftermath of that also is in the book. But it was a great, which is why I started my book with it, because I thought that's something everyone can relate to everywhere in the world, the Beatles, and how a young cub reporter looking to meet them and looking to make his career found a way to meet them no matter what. And that was my opening chapter.
Absolutely. And of course, as I already mentioned earlier, there couldn't have been a bigger hook for the book than this incident, this episode with the Beatles. So yes, thank you so much for sharing that. So just before we leave this section with the Beatles, Kabirji, I just had one final question with regards to them. Obviously, after you had taped the interview and you had given it to All India Radio, they unfortunately couldn't value it as much, and so they actually taped over it later on.
Yeah, they broadcast it. They broadcast it. When I went to them a week later, I said, can I have a copy?
Yeah.
They couldn't find it. Those days, they were so badly funded. They didn't have money for new tapes. So every time they did an interview, they would broadcast it, then record somebody else's interview over it 3-4 days later. I didn't realize this. So when I went for the interview, they taped over the Beatles interview. And this really depressed me so much, shook me so much. I said, I don't want to work with these people. And that and a few other things. And I decided it was time to leave Delhi and find another destiny. So I got onto a train with 700 rupees in my pocket, set off for Bombay to find a new destiny. And that's how the rest of my life began.
Absolutely. And is it fair to say, Kabirji, that I did actually, during my research for this interview, obviously I'd read the book and everything, but you did actually give an interview recently, I think in the last couple of years, to Doordarshan as well as All India Radio. So would it be a fair assessment to say that you have forgiven them for the mishap that happened? So,
of course.
Okay.
Not only forgiven them, in a sense, I thanked them. Because if they hadn't done that to me, maybe I'd still be working for All India Radio and Television. I just wanted a good job and secure job where I did creative things. So I have to thank them for their lack of money or their insensitivity, because that set me on a much bigger road, which took me across many film industries and many countries to create a career in many languages.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, it's amazing how life turns out, because that particular incident was what catapulted you into going to Mumbai and superstardom.
Absolutely.
So obviously, the next step, Kabirji, would be to talk about your, your career in film, stage, and television, of course. But just before we go there, I just want to touch a little bit upon the story of your parents. So your father was obviously a descendant of Guru Nanak Ji, and your mother was an English woman, and they met at Oxford and they had gotten married. And can you tell us about their dynamics? Was it very common back then to have mixed marriages, mixed race marriages?
No. It was, in fact,
what was it like?
the very first marriage between an Indian student and an English student in Oxford.
Mm-hmm.
Then they were married in the Oxford Registry Office. And there was great opposition to it. Mm-hmm. They faced a lot of racism. But, my father was a very well-built guy. And he was he threw this thing called a hammer for Oxford. And you couldn't mess with him. So the opposition was mainly snide remarks, little vandalism, etc. But nobody could physically attack him because he was so strong. But the fact of the matter is that they got married. And, this is how my father proposed to my mother. They were both part of a kind of leftist group that believed in the welfare of people and the upliftment of the poor and the benefit of those less fortunate, etc. And he said, I love you and I want you to marry me, but I can't offer you any security. Most likely you'll be waiting outside jails for me to come out because I'm going back to India to fight your people, the British. So I can't offer you any security or any luxuries, but will you marry me? And she thought about it. And she said, well, I love England. I love my country, but I hate colonialism. And I will fight against colonialism because I don't believe that's right. And I will come with you and I will share your life. And she came to India. Now, they came back to India. My father was much more, he was sort of the hot wire. He was a tremendous orator, rabble-rouser, strike organizer, demonstrations, etc. My mother was the Gandhian. And she was actually picked by Mahatma Gandhi to lead a demonstration in our hometown in Punjab, Dera Baba Nanak, in the year 1942. Right. And when she did that, a British woman protesting against the English as a Gandhian satyagrahi was huge news. Right. So, but and then together they shared this journey, and they had many famous friends who became prime ministers and presidents. The President of India, Gyani Zail Singh, Inder Gujral, Sheikh Abdullah, all these people were their buddies in Punjab when they had their little huts and they lived there. And they all went on to become very famous in politics. But my parents decided, once freedom was achieved, to move on from politics. And they found their calling in different ways in spirituality. My father had various mystic experiences. And I say mystic experiences, that's what attracts me to people like Rumi, because I've seen that firsthand. And inexplicable things, and his whole life changed. And he became a major guru and spent the last 30 years in Italy, actually. He got to Italy before I did. Right. And became a major figure there. And my mother discovered Buddhism and went on to become the highest ranked Buddhist nun in the world. And so she found a fulfillment in that sense. And yet, even though they moved on in life, they were geographically separated. My mother was based in a monastery in Sikkim. He was in Italy. But my mother traveled a lot. Yet they always met with great respect. Whenever my mother went to Europe promoting Buddhism on these lecture tours, they would meet. And my father had a picture of my mother in her robes framed in his sitting room opposite his favorite chair. So that is the kind of bond between these two people, even though they were separated in so many ways and yet united in spirit. It's one of the most touching stories in my book. And I think it's a great human story.
Absolutely. And I think it was a remarkable story. And in fact, we will, of course, talk about Sandokan a little bit down the line. But if I could just make a comparison, Kabirji, between Sandokan being a Malaysian prince/pirate who had an English love interest, and they were both fighting the British together. It seems to resonate a lot with your parents' story. And did that come across?
You're very perceptive to have spotted that. In fact, sometimes I tell Italian interviews when they ask me about Sandokan, I said, my father was the original Sandokan. He was the revolutionary fighting the British. He was the one who married an English girl. They faced the British together. You're very perceptive in that because it is true. And when I played Sandokan, which is the role of a pirate with a freedom fighter, I think the experience and the journey of my father was certainly a great inspiration to me because I related to that kind of passion he felt for the country, for his cause, for his people. And I grew up seeing that. And it was able to help me bring a great authenticity to the role of Sandokan, a great power, because it was the power of belief. And that's the strongest power in the world. So I've got to thank my father for giving me that, and my mother for giving me that background that made me so right for the role.
Yes, absolutely. And I do thank you for that, because I wasn't sure if I was clutching at straws here when I made the comparison,
No,
but
it's very
I'm
perceptive of you to
extremely,
see
yeah, thank you so much
the
for that. Yeah,
comparisons, yes.
for sure. Okay, so just one final point, Kabirji, before we move on to the next section, which is I would like to ask, and bringing it back to Guru Nanak Ji as well as Rumi, I would like to just ask you the same question that I asked you during your visit to Dhaka. And that is that even though Rumi and Guru Nanak Ji are both separated by distance and time, if hypothetically they had met each other, what would they have said to one another if they had ever met? So what would be your take on that?
Firstly, I think people, and I regard Guru Nanak Dev as a mystic as well, because he had this great moment of communion in Kartarpur Sahib, and he came out of the water and said, there is one God, and he saw that God as the creator and be-all of the universe. And that's what Rumi's Sufi mystic experience also was, the oneness of God and the immense desire to be one with that oneness. And once you get into the mystic states and feel and become one with the oneness of the consciousness that exists, you are in another level altogether. And both Guru Nanak and Rumi all talk about union with the beloved and union with the God. Because beloved and God become interchangeable terms. The intensity of love you feel for somebody that you're passionately in love with is the same love and intensity that you feel for God once you realize and connect with that energy. Whether you call it God, or you call it Allah, or you call it Ishwar, or you call it Paramatma, whatever you call it, it is the energy of all creation, the consciousness of all creation, that energy permeates, that consciousness permeates the universe in everything, which is why when people have divine experiences, they don't even need to say anything. They just look at each other, they know. And if they talked at all, it would be to talk about the bliss of union with that, as well as the need for human beings to understand that love, service to others, respect for others, tolerance, all these are things that are vital human values. I think all mystics share that. So I can't tell you the exact words that they would say to each other, but I think the feelings and experiences they would share would certainly resonate with each other. Because even though one talks of Ek Onkar and the other talks of Allah, the destination is the same.
Absolutely, and the destination is the same, and I think that's really very aptly said, Kaviji. So thank you so much for indulging me and all of us here at Book Cafe Podcast, because we do have, we're very huge fans of religious history, and so this really is something that we will definitely take to heart, and we're really glad to have had your answer on this for posterity. So we really must get back to your career in film, stage, and television alike. So three different platforms. If I were to ask you which one you enjoy the most, do you have a favorite, or do you see all three of them as equally valid, and these are all different platforms, but you enjoy all of them equally well? So what would be your take on that?
They are different platforms, they are different mediums, and there are different techniques that you have to use in the theater, in film, and in television. There are major differences. Yeah. And they're not technical differences. There are, in the theater, for instance, the speed at which you respond, the cueing of has to be very sharp. Because if I'm talking to you, when I end, you must begin immediately. Right. You can't afford silences between each person speaking unless there's a very strong reason for it. Right. So that pace of interaction that happens in theater to keep the audience alive. That's a cinematic technique. In cinema, you get more breathing room for people to show their emotions before they speak. So because this camera registers all that. In long shot in theater, that won't register. So you really have to adjust to the needs of different things. But overall, since you asked me what I like, I think the experience of acting on stage is sublime because it is the actor's moment. Nobody disturbs you. Nobody interrupts you every 3 sentences to say, shot over, next shot. You are performing in one uninterrupted flow. Yes, you have to prepare for a few weeks before that, but the actual moment of performance is one flow. Film is more like sort of perfecting each piece of a jigsaw puzzle and then leaving it, and then the director assembles it at the end. And you just have to make sure each shot is correct for what it is, and hopefully it all adds up together.
Absolutely.
It's much harder to remember your emotional continuity because that's what matters from shot to shot. Because often you're shooting out of order also. You're shooting at different times, great spaces. So knowing what each shot has to do, that's a separate thing. So it's a different crowd, but I enjoy theater acting because of the joy it gives me as an actor. I enjoy television for the fame it gives me as an actor. And I enjoy films for the recognition they give me in the world of film. And the fact that, unlike television, it's not limited to one country, it goes worldwide. You're part of franchises like the Bond film and Octopussy or Bold and Beautiful. These are things that go to hundreds of countries with over 1 billion viewers. So television gives you that instant reach on the big ones, on the big shows. Generally, television is country-based. Films certainly give you a sense of immortality because they're always there. They're always there. Today, of course, things have changed because now, because of the streaming services, everything's always there. It's not just film that's always there. Even TV and the streaming services are always there, on demand. But film certainly has a magic of its own, which is not like television. But each has their own strengths, their own powers. As I said, one gives you creative satisfaction, one gives you vast reach, and the other gives you a kind of glory, because film is still regarded as a very special place to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of television, Kabirji, I just want to fast forward a little bit to one of your most prominent roles. Of course, I'm talking about Prince Omar. Omar being one of
Prince Omar in the Bold and Beautiful.
In the Bold and the Beautiful. And you went on record as saying that Hollywood didn't really create roles for Indians at the time. So did it ever cross your mind that perhaps you could have, spoken to the producer and tweaked the origin story of Prince Omar from being a Moroccan prince to being an Indian prince? Because at the end of the day, if memory serves me right, Mansur Ali Khan Pataudi and Saif Ali Khan, his son, the princely states were still around even after independence. So did that ever cross your mind to talk to the producers about tweaking that in a little bit?
Well, firstly, this is one. Yes, there were huge problems of being cast as an Indian. In fact, the only place where I was absolutely correctly cast was in Octopussy, where I played a Sikh character, which is what I am, from a Punjabi family, Sikh origins. Generally, I had to adapt into many other nationalities because, fortunately, the way I looked, I could. And I got the role of Prince Omar because it was written for a Moroccan prince. And I looked Moroccan enough. And the producers in Bold and Beautiful were aware of my success in Europe, and they wanted, to take any actors that promote their shows more in Europe. So there wasn't any question me telling them how about making it Indian. It was already written. But I did a film called The Maharaja's Daughter for the Italians, where I did play an Indian Maharaja, which had a similar kind of story to Bold and Beautiful. But the joy of playing Prince Omar was that I'd actually shot 3 films in Morocco. And it's surprisingly not The Bold and the Beautiful, even though I played a Moroccan prince there. I'd done a film called Beyond Justice with Rutger Hauer. I'd done Ashanti with Michael Caine and Omar Sharif. And there was another film made called Mashamal, which was a Moroccan-Italian production. So 3 times I'd be in Morocco, shooting in Morocco, and then I'm playing the Prince of Morocco. So I don't know what mystical relationship I have with Morocco also, but it turns up often enough in my career. So, but this is very special being in The Bold and Beautiful because, these soap operas, as they call them in America, are not just soap operas in the rest of the world. They're prime time viewing. And prime time viewing in 150 countries. And there's newspapers around them. There's events around them. There's conventions. There's exhibitions. You receive mail from all over. It just changes your profile as an actor to become a worldwide actor because suddenly all these people are in their sitting rooms every day for a year and they know you. And so if they meet you on the street, they just come and start chatting with you as though they're your best friends because they think they are. They've seen you in their sitting rooms,
right.
Watching TV. And I always ask people, excuse me, where are you from? Because when I ask people where they're from, then immediately I know what they've seen of mine. Because nobody's seen all my work.
Absolutely.
If they say I'm from India, I say, okay, you've seen me in my Bollywood films or maybe the occasional American thing. If they're from Europe, I know they've seen me in Sandokan and my Italian thing. If they're from America, I know they've seen me in the American series. Each sees me differently. Yeah. And this recognition that Bold and Beautiful gives you, as well as the Bond films give you, is unmatchable because billions of dollars have been spent building brands like the Bond franchise, like the Bold and Beautiful franchise. And suddenly you come in riding the wave of that, You're benefiting from all that. Right. It's a huge advantage for an actor to be featured in both these because of the fan base it gives you and as well as the experience of working with such fine actors, such wonderfully professional actors who learn their lines, come on time, get the job done. Because, soap operas or daytime series like The Bold and Beautiful, they are the hardest form of manual labor and the hardest form of acting because you are acting 12 hours a day, but those 12 hours are the most concentrated 12 hours you could imagine. You have to turn out half an hour edited by the end of 12 hours. That is like making a feature film in 1 week. If you say 2.5 hours a week. So if you forget your lines and force people to reshoot and delay matters, then they go overtime. The minute they go overtime, not just people on the floor, but the whole building goes into overtime because they're editing while you're acting, right? As you're acting on the floor with 5 cameras around you, they cut to camera 1, cut to camera 2, cut to camera, they're editing. So the whole unit is there. And if you delay them and go overtime, you become too expensive. They will write you out, put another actor in your role. So the pressure on you is enormous to get this right the first time around. But for all the pains that it takes, it is an immensely rewarding thing to be in a series like The Bold and Beautiful.
For sure, absolutely. And just circling back to the Bond franchise and Octopussy, Kabirji, obviously Roger Moore was playing Bond officially at the time in 1983, and you were there in the movie with him playing the C character. But I just wanted to ask if I'm sure you must have known that, you've gone on record as saying that Sean Connery is your favorite Bond actor. And in fact, Sean Connery did actually come up with an apocryphal film that very same year in 1983. So if I were to ask you this question, Kabirji, if you could have switched playing your character in Octopussy to playing a character, perhaps an Indian character, with Sean Connery in his film, would you have made the switch or would you have said, no, let me stick to what I'm doing with Roger Moore in Octopussy? What would you have done?
That's a hard one. That's a hard one. Because, I love Sean Connery, and I would have certainly been heavily inclined to go with Sean Connery. But because Octopussy gave me so much in my life in terms of fame, I can't diss that and say I wouldn't have done it, because that's a theoretical question, it's a theoretical answer. But the truth of the matter is, I think Roger Moore was a very nice gentleman. But I do believe Sean Connery is the ultimate Bond. And I think the second best Bond is Daniel Craig, because he brought back a rugged masculinity to the role of Bond. So I owe a lot to Bond. And I admire Sean Connery. I had the joy of meeting him once at Michael Caine's home. And he is larger than life even when you meet him. Wow. He has this wonderful presence, warm, wonderful sense of Scotch humor. And I enjoyed meeting him.
Yeah, that's absolutely lovely. And of course, all of these anecdotes are there in the book, and of course, we'll try not to spoil it for anybody who might want to pick up the book. So, let me just come back to Sandokan, Kabirji. Obviously, the entire series was based on books, and because we are a podcast about books, after all, it's in the title, so we definitely have to touch a little bit upon the origins of Sandokan. So, Emilio Salgari, the writer, he wrote it a long time ago, about 100 years back, and it was translated into every other European language except English. So right. my question to you would be that are English translations readily available now in today's time in India?
Okay. Yes, they are. Yes,
and if memory serves me right, I think that there's about 11 Sandokan books. Would you happen to have a favorite out of the 11 that have been published?
I can't say. I'm attached to the same ones that, because they took the Sandokan series that I did based on two books. Right. They were sort of combined together. And they created an original screenplay. Right. So I'm connected to those two books because they're the ones that I related to the most. But Sandokan was like, if you have to think of him, you have to think of him like a Robin Hood. Mm-hmm. Every English child knows who Robin Hood is. Okay. Every Italian child knew Emilio Salgari, and many European children did too. And so, and mind you, Sandokan had been made as a film before I did Sandokan. There was a film with Steve Reeves, who was Mr. World, right, that they made. And that film went nowhere, it tanked. But then when they made the television series with me, it became the biggest success European television had ever seen. It had a 32% share, for those who understand what that means. It's astonishing. And literally, traffic stopped on the streets of Italy when it was screened. Whenever I went out, it was crowds, a jam, everything was like, after entering the Beatles, I experienced Beatlemania in Italy. And not just Italy, Spain, France, Germany, all these countries. And in fact, I just went to Spain. In Italy, first I released a copy of the Italian edition of my book. I'm trying to see if I have a copy here. The Italian edition of my book was released last year. And then this year, I released the Spanish edition of my book. And it's amazing, that all these years later, they still remember me, because the Sandokan series keeps getting shown over and over on television. So it is not only Sandokan's comebacks to Spain, but he's writing his life story. So it becomes wall-to-wall coverage in the media. Mm-hmm. And I'm so grateful for all the love that these countries give me. I think Italy and Spain were the biggest. I think that Sandokan mania has faded somewhat in France and Germany now. But even today, in Italy and Spain and many countries in South America, it's wide awake. When I went to Cuba, they were serenading with Sandokan songs on the streets of Havana when I went there a few years ago for the cigar conference. And so Sandokan was just a 6-hour series. That's the thing people have to realize. It was just 6 hours, not some long-running series. Right. Then they made another 6 hours a few years later. Then they made another 6 hours a few years later. So But my initial fame that got me European stardom, that led to all the films that I did with Europe, that led to all the honors that Italy gave me, started with those 6 hours of a series called Sandokan.
Absolutely. And of course, I have to say that whenever that theme music hits, you just can't help but start dancing. And it really was a phenomenon, like you said. Okay,
Yeah.
so Kabirji, at this point in time, I have to say that I've pretty much exhausted all of my questions for this episode. But I do have one or two surprise guest questions for you. Okay, and
All right.
so before I ask you that, let me just put it in context that obviously Miss Parveen Babi was one of your great loves that you've talked about a lot in the book. And so my wife and I, Jennifer, were also fans of her biography written
All
by
right.
Miss Karishma Upadhyaya. And so the
Yeah, I know good.
absolutely. And so the surprise guest question that we have for you is actually from Miss Karishma Upadhyaya. So with your permission, let me just read it out to you. And so the question is, so this is Karishma Upadhyaya asking the question. Dear Kabir, this is perhaps one of the most candid biographies written by an Indian celebrity. Was this a decision that you thought hard about, or did it happen organically? Also, were there bits of the book that were particularly difficult to write? And if so, how did you deal with that?
When I set out to write my story, I realized that, people don't, no matter how wonderful your career has been, people don't want to read a list of great achievements. It becomes boring.
Right.
They want a human story.
Mhm.
Who was a human being in the middle of all this that was happening? What were the stumbling blocks? When did you fall? Where did you screw up? What were your relationships really like? And I decided I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Because if I tell the truth from my heart as clearly as I can, then I will hopefully reach an equation with you at a human level. You will see me as a human being. You'll understand my dilemmas because I share my dilemmas. So it was a very conscious decision to tell things as honestly as I could from my point of view.
Yeah.
And for Karishma to say that, I thank her for saying that because she's written Parveen's biography and she understands the process of writing about her life. So coming from her, I do thank her for that compliment. Yes, there were many portions that were very difficult to write because to talk about things that traumatized you, you have to relive them. You have to go through them again, whether it is to do with my struggles with my schizophrenic son, or whether it is the traumas that I experienced with Parveen Babi, or the immense dilemmas that my first wife, Protima, confronted me with. Many things. I had to go in there, I had to write about it, and write about it in a way whereby it just told you the way it happened. Let the consequences be what they were. This is what happened, guys. I regret that I did not have time to go into many more such relationships and many more such experiences, because ultimately you're writing about 70 years of life in 300 pages. So something's got to give. So certain things I've explored very closely, very carefully, and shared those emotions and dilemmas and conflicts and screw-ups and triumphs and everything with you. And other places I've just had to say, this happened. I'm sorry, but that's another story. I use this phrase, but that's another story a lot in my book, because yes. I need to keep on track when I'm trying to hold your attention by not going into each side alley along the way, but sticking to the main story of what happened to this character in that situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if I just may, if I have to concur with Karishma that this particular book was written with a lot of candor. It was extremely raw and unfiltered, And I think that it only made for a better book. So yes, we really thank Karishma from the show for asking that question, and it is something that I think was very nicely explained, exactly what you said.
No, and Karishma wrote a very fine book herself. There's one or two things that I may have a difference of opinion on, but I think it's an enormous labor of love to write a book, and I think Parveen Babi deserves a book to herself that tells her story as completely as possible. And I thank Karishma for doing that.
For sure. And as I'd mentioned, Kabirji, I do have one more surprise guest question for you. Would you like to take a guess as to who it could be?
Whole world to choose, 7 billion people to choose from.
7 billion.
Help me, yeah.
Okay, no problem. So it's none other than Miss Pooja Bedi, your daughter. We actually reached out to her, and she was very nice enough to send us a question. And of course, we're also fans of her mom, Protima Bedi, and we read her book as well. And so the question that I'd like to give to you from Pooja is this one. And her question is that, Dear Dad, your mom and dad were so busy with humanity and community in India. Did you ever feel neglected as a child? What were your feelings then and learnings as an adult in that respect? And also, how did that impact your relationship with your own children? So yeah, there you go. The question from Miss Pooja Bedi.
So there's two questions here. One is, did I ever feel neglected as a child? The answer to that is honestly no. I didn't have much as a child. We never had material things, but somehow the atmosphere in the house, which is whether it was a government flat, a 2-bedroom government flat, or wherever we were, there was always my father was a constant presence. My mother, who was busy at office, but always loving. So I always had a sense of being loved and cared for, and I knew I could always cuddle up in my father's arms and he would hold me and embrace me. I knew I could always go to my mother and, lean on her and she would cuddle me. I never felt unloved or neglected, nor deprived, even though we didn't have much. Occasionally I'd win some prizes and things would come and I'd think it's like Christmas, but it wasn't a materialistically oriented family. So, no, I did not feel deprived. How did that affect my relationship with my children? Well, it's a different situation. It's a different situation because after my divorce with Protima, which happened for reasons of its own, my career took me to Italy and to Hollywood. And I realized that the children would not see as much of me, obviously, as if I lived in India. So I tried to make amends for it. I would bring them over every vacation to America, spend their summer vacations with me, sometimes winter vacations. And in fact, their last 3 full years of high school were with me in America. But having said that, I realized that for most part, I was an absentee father. And should I have done more? Could I have done more? Perhaps. But then one, in the battle for remaining in the industry, the fight for survival, the pressures of the time, you're on a different continent. You give less time to children than you should. And I regret that. I do regret that. I wish I could have spent more time with the children. And I'm sorry. I apologize to them if I didn't spend enough time with them. But they were always close to my heart, always. Yeah, it's a long and deep story.
Of course, a long and deep story, and we would, of course, hope that it continues. So, Kabirji, we've pretty much come to the end of our episode. But just before we let you go, given that what a runaway success Stories I Must Tell has been, is there a part 2 that your fans and readers can look forward to? Is there another book in the pipeline that might come out very soon? Is there anything you can do to enlighten us
Well,
on
there's
that?
another book in the pipeline. I certainly have to write another book because there's so many unwritten stories. Um, so many unwritten stories. Um, and I thought I'd be able to get down to that much sooner. But writing a book is hard enough. Promoting it is no less strenuous because you have to go
Right.
all over to
Yeah.
film festivals, to book festivals, meet people, and find book readers and make them tell them a good reason to buy your book because writers want to be read. And I've done this. Now my book is available in Hindi, in Marathi. Hopefully, a Bengali publisher will emerge as well, because it would give me great joy if my book was printed in Bengali for a populace that's a major part of this Earth's population, and they can read my book in my words. So hopefully Bengali will happen also. But then I'll be doing all the literary tours in Bangladesh and in West Bengal as well.
Yeah.
So promoting a book is hard work. And that's what's pretty much occupied me since I've written the book, going all these different literary festivals, etc. Now I will have to sit down and start thinking about my next book and start writing my next book, whatever that is. So the process has begun.
Okay.
Hopefully,
Wonderful.
you'll see another book soon.
Oh, fabulous, fabulous. And of course, we, the readers and the fans, can't wait to read the next book that comes out. So let me just end by saying that for our viewers and listeners who have been with us all this time, thank you very much for staying till the end. Be sure to subscribe to the channel on YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube. You can also catch the episode on Apple, Google, and Spotify. It's available for download. Let me just grab the book from behind me. The book, once again, is Stories I Must Tell by Kabir Bedi. It's a fabulous book written by a fantastic author, so be sure to check it out. Kabirji, my thanks to you as well from the show. You've been a wonderful guest, and I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I really hope to have
Thank
you
you,
back.
Omar. And I must say, Omar is a very special name that keeps cropping up in my life, because I've done 3 films with Omar Sharif, which I've written about in my book as well. I played Prince Omar in The Bold and the Beautiful.
And your
My grandson is called Omar, and here I am talking to you, Omar. So Omar is a recurring theme in my life. And, I'm really very grateful that you're talking to me, because you're relating me to a whole different audience, an educated audience, a literate audience, hopefully one that wants to understand human experiences through a writer who's writing honestly about his life and all the ups and downs involved, and all the human experiences that one could hope to experience or learn from or not to do, all of which emerges in my book. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to all you wonderful people who are watching, and hope you get a chance to read my book and share my journey, and hopefully enlighten and embellish yours as well in the process of knowing what I did.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you so much once again for your kind words, Kabirji. And of course, as I mentioned, that we will look forward to your next book project. And we do invite you back to Dhaka for a future visit whenever that happens, because I can tell you that there's a lot of people here who are waiting for the next saga of Mr. Kabir Bedi. So thank you so much, Kabirji.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you and Jennifer again.
Absolutely.
And on my next visit to Dhaka.
Thank you so much, and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye now.